Hello, and welcome to Open Connectivity Foundation's webinar, Smart Homes and the New Normal. If time allows today, we will take questions from the audience. If you do have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A portal. A recording of this webinar will also be made available following the event. Today's speakers include Bruno Johnson, CEO of Cascoda and Vice Chair of the OCF Marketing and Communications Working Group, Dr. Milind Gandhe, VP of Systems Business Unit at TATA Elxsi, and Julian Issa, Lead Analyst of Intelligent Home and Vision at Futuresource Consulting. Bruno, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alison. So in the first part of this webinar, I will introduce the Open Connectivity Foundation's core technology. Next slide, please, Alison. So what is the Open Connectivity Foundation's technology? Well, it is a technology that is optimized for the Internet of Things. It is designed specifically for constrained devices. It's operating system independent, based on a RESTful core framework that provides the necessary resources for device discovery, device onboarding, and secure connectivity. There's a strong certification program in place, and it really does provide best-in-class security. Next slide, please. So really, OCF's goals are to make it easy for developers to deal with the complexity of IoT communications. It provides a necessary foundation that allows for almost limitless scalability for IP-based connectivity with the Internet of Things. This means device to device, device to cloud, and even cloud to cloud connectivity. And based on this fundamental architecture, we have a framework for secure interoperability of different types of devices. And because of this, it supports multiple vertical markets at the same time. So for the first time, you can deploy this technology in different parts of, let's say, a home or a building, and the data can be accessed by different vertical markets. So it provides a path towards the future consolidation of standards, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And it also has a common set of data models that can be used to interface with all IoT devices and their underlying data. Next slide, please, Alison. So OCF is among the largest industry-led efforts to develop a secure interoperability IoT ecosystem. It has many liaison relationships with many of the other important consortia and standards within the space. And its standard is completely open source and provides for that secure interoperability within the IoT. And of course, is extremely secure. And we have a dedicated security work group that has benchmarked the OCF standard against the leading emerging security standards that are coming out from North America and Europe. Next slide. The specifications are published and open source, and there is an open source reference implementation called IoTivity that is publicly available. And you can join OCF at a basic level membership at no cost. Decisions are made by consensus, and the OCF core framework is established and can carry your interaction and your data models on top of it, which is an important development. Next slide. So there are three key pillars to OCF. Really, it's a dedicated and optimized protocol for IoT, specifically for constrained devices, with a very simple, RESTful architecture, and has built-in mechanisms for device discovery and device onboarding with high security. The second pillar is that it's standards-based and open source. So this really allows multiple users in multiple ecosystems to use this technology and allows for the flexibility in creating solutions. And certification is key. This is the third pillar. Certification to guarantee interoperability of devices within the ecosystem. Next slide. Now, OCF standard has been mapped by our dedicated security work group against all the important baseline security standards that have been published in North America and Europe. And as you can see, it fully adheres to some of them, and those that it doesn't adhere to, most of the requirements are not met because the requirement is simply not applicable for this kind of IoT device. We believe that there is no other standard in existence which has such a strong conformance to these standards. Next slide. So regarding certification, we have a conformance test tool, and each device must pass the conformance test in order to be certified as an OCF device. And this is mandatory. Remember, the stack is open source, and the conformance test tool is also freely available. Next slide. The specification is published as an ISO IEC standard. The link is given in this slide, and it's also publicly available through the OCF website. So let's have a look at how things fit together. OCF has a core architecture, and this is the core that provides the discovery, onboarding, and secure connectivity of devices within any IP network. On top of that, we have the security resources, so things like PKI certificates that are supported by OCF to allow a particular device to be highly secure in its communication through the network. And then the data models on top. So OCF has its own data models, but optionally, you can use your own data models and use them to be carried by the OCF's architecture with simple, RESTful descriptions. And when it comes to using this, it's backed up by an ISO IEC specification, open source reference code, and a strong certification program. Next slide. So, as I mentioned before, there's the OCF core foundation on the left, and as well as this, a open source project called IoTivity that is available, freely available on GitHub. And this has a separate website to support it, but is in full coordination with the Open Connectivity Foundation. Next slide. So in this slide, we give a little more detail. I'm not going to talk through it, but basically the IoTivity stack is available through an Apache 2 license. It runs on various platforms and including embedded applications. And we've shown here how it can be used in the smart building automation space, the smart home space, and the smart healthcare space. Next slide. So regarding the development support, when you try to use IoTivity, we have plenty of resources available. Comprehensive getting started user guide to get users up and running within an hour, comprehensive code generation using our open APIs, and the conformance test tools, which allows you to test your particular application and check it for conformance. So on top of this, we have two different clients available. There's the onboarding tool, which is known as OTGC. This is a generic Linux or Android-based client, and this is used to manage your network and onboard devices onto your network. And OCF Device Spy is a Windows-based tool. This is a development tool, and it's akin to a network sniffer. You can really understand what's going on within your network, and this aids your engineers for development. Okay, so that's a brief overview of OCF, and I think now we'll hand over to Milind from TATA Elxsi. Over to you, Milind.
Thanks, Bruno. That was a very useful and comprehensive overview of what OCF does. So today I'm going to talk about what TATA Elxsi does in the area of consumer appliances, and specifically how OCF supports some of the work that we do at TATA Elxsi. But before we get started, I thought I'd give a little bit of an introduction to who TATA Elxsi is. So next slide, please. So TATA Elxsi is a part of India's largest industrial group, the Tata Group, which is more than 150 years old. The Tata Group is present in 150 countries with almost 750,000 employees, very, very diverse multinational workforce, total revenues of $113 billion US. So absolutely a global group. We work in 10 business verticals from salt and silicon. The group has a very strong DNA of giving back to society, and so the group is itself owned by 2 philanthropic trusts. It's also invested in educational institutes in India and outside India as well. Next slide, please. So TATA Elxsi is a part of the Tata Group that is focused on combining creativity and engineering. So it's a company that tries to leverage both the left brain and the right brain approach to designing devices. A 30-year-old company, 6,000 engineers and designers, headquartered in Bangalore in South India. We have development centers also besides Bangalore in Trivandrum, Chennai, Pune, and Mumbai, all cities in south of India. The company works in a few key verticals, medical, automotive, aerospace, and broadcast. But today's focus is really going to be about the work that we do in home appliances. And when it comes to home appliances, there are 2 critical things that TATA Elxsi does that are important. One is our capability in product and digital engineering in terms of actually designing, engineering a product, but then also our ability in design and design thinking, which is all about understanding the user and shaping the product to interact with the user in meaningful ways. Next slide, please. So the company really works as an innovation partner for several appliance makers around the world. The design process starts from users, understanding users through market research, and I'm sure Julian will have something to add to that as well. But we spend quite a bit of our time in market research, ethnography, that sort of activity. Those insights then feed into our R&D capability, which is really balanced on 3 verticals. The IoT piece, which is what OCF brings in, the hardware and the embedded software capability, and then the AI capability. And the final proof of the pudding really is going to market, and to that extent, we work with our customers in terms of product validation and manufacturing support. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit more detail about the kind of work that we do. Like I mentioned, understanding the user is critical, and a lot of that is actually getting into focus groups, doing interviews with end users, understanding their needs, their requirements, how they use consumer appliances, because a lot of this usage is what we've found is very, very culture-centric, and basis that some gap analysis to identify what opportunities exist. At the other end is the core capability in technology, in embedded product design, connectivity, application development, and so on. And both of these are then married to create core products, which then the customers can take to market. And some sample examples here that where we've leveraged OCF has been a connected living room solution to control air conditioners, to control video doorbells, and so a multi-appliance management solution as an example. Also a connected tea maker, so people in India drink much more tea than coffee, but this could also translate to connected coffee makers elsewhere in the world. So that is a sort of flavor, and the design capability at TATA Elxsi has been very, very well recognized. We have 600 plus designers, one of the largest design houses in Asia, and we recently won the IF Design Award in 2020 as well as the German Design Award in 2019. Next slide, please. So just as an example, I wanted to share a global engineering case study where we set up a global engineering center for a Japanese home appliance OEM. And the idea really was to support this customer to create differentiation specifically for the Indian market, but then also support their global product development efforts. And we've worked with them in multiple areas, understanding users in India, developing AI capability to make their products more intelligent, and also helping them build connected products. The real objective was to really meld the global technology with a sense of local Indian design and build very, very custom products, but then also leverage AI and IoT for some fairly interesting use cases. And if we have the time, we can talk about that. So in a short period of about 3 years, this center has now delivered 14 design projects, 22 projects in AI, robotics, and IoT, and 16 projects in computer-aided engineering. Next slide, please. So that's all I had to say, and then maybe I'll invite Julian to talk a little bit about the market research that they have done.
Thanks, Milind, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I know there's lots of people tuning in from India and to California, so early mornings and late evenings. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your insights, Bruno and Milind. So I'm going to be talking about what is going on in the smart home ecosystem from what's happening right now to what's going to be happening in the next 3 to 5 years. Next slide, Alison. So I'm just going to give an overview of what's happening right now. So we have a number of different players in the smart home industry coming from different areas trying to seek value add. First of all, we have the home automation custom installers who have seen year-on-year sales growth being pretty incremental over the last few years, but that's suffered this year through the global pandemic. Then we have the suppliers and appliance vendors who are increasingly making moves into the smart home by adding Wi-Fi capabilities to their devices and moving to adjacent product categories. So with home appliances, which we also measure here at Futuresource, we've seen a growing number of devices becoming smart. So in 2019, we were expecting the home appliances industry to be about 8% smart, 10% this year and 17% next year in 2021. And then we have the third-party service providers, so telecommunications, utilities providers who already have the infrastructure in the home, and they've been looking to increase their footprint into the smart home. So recent examples of this in the US is Xfinity's home security, and then we have Vodafone's V-Home package in Europe as an example. But the really interesting category at the moment, the fastest growing, is the smart home vendors. They're the ones making the DIY products that you can buy online very easily, and that's where pretty much all the smart home market leaders are. Smart home, not smart appliances. So we have Signify's Philips Hue, for example, who dominate the smart lighting market, and then Samsung, Ring, Arlo, and August, who lead their respective smart security segments. Next slide, please. So DIY products, they're the key reason why the smart home segment is the fastest growing, and one of the fastest growing within the consumer electronics space at the moment. So in 2020, we're predicting 170 million smart home devices will be sold across the 5 categories of security and monitoring, lighting, power, climate control, and hubs. And the smart home industry is definitely not slowing down. We're expecting volume compound annual growth rates of 25% between 2020 and 2024. So as you can see from this graph, smart security and monitoring, that takes up a huge segment of the smart home industry, represents 59% of sales. And this is not set to slow down. So we're expecting by 2024, this number will still be 51%. So one of the key changes within the smart home space in recent years has been vendors going from simply just selling the hardware, selling the device, to incorporating a smart home as a service business model by offering a bolt-on subscription service, which usually involves a recurring monthly payment to the consumer. This has been really prevalent in smart security, and especially in the 2 biggest segments of cameras and doorbells. So we've seen Arlo, Amazon Ring, Google Nest, Canary target this space by offering a bolt-on range of services such as cloud storage, advanced scene recognition, facial recognition technology, and unlimited video downloads through a freemium business model. And so the value of this model for the vendor is it's really comprehensive. Consistent revenue, increased engagement with the consumer every single month, as well as greater flow of consumer data. Next slide. So now looking at the regional split of specifically the smart security and monitoring space. So North America, led by the US, biggest market by a mile, 52%. A third of households now own at least one smart security and monitoring device. The Chinese market is also pretty big. Nearly a quarter of global sales in 2020 will happen there. And one of the key areas of growth in recent years in this market has been the IP security cameras, which are selling very cheaply given that a number of Chinese manufacturers are making them, which has made them very accessible and very affordable. So the average selling price of one of these devices in 2020 is only $34 in China. And the third largest market is the Western European market, representing 17% of total sales at the moment. And that's led by the United Kingdom, where there's a higher appetite for smart products, mainly because new releases coming from the US land there first and then head off to continental Europe. Next slide. So the smart home, we've got a new normal. It's definitely been impacted by COVID, which is interesting, but the crux of it is that the pandemic is only going to be a minor blip in the smart home industry's long-term trajectory. Despite this, we have seen a number of changes. So the first one is that the consumer has become far more accustomed to their smart home devices, as well as the voice function, given they're spending more time at home during the stringent lockdown measures that we've seen all over the place. We're also seeing the DIY and online market witness a significant uptick, again, as a result of these stringent lockdown measures. And then on the flip side, the custom installers have been severely impacted during those lockdown measures, but we do expect to see a rebound post-lockdown. Now looking at the individual products, so they've had a mix of success because of the pandemic. So smart detectors, for example, smoke alarms, they've seen a big uptick in sales as consumers have found themselves at home for longer, and so they're far more conscious of the possibility of a fire or smoke happening. Then we've seen lighting also see a slight uptick in expectation. Again, the consumer is now spending more money on home improvements during lockdown and less on vacations, dining out, all that stuff, all the fun stuff. Then on the other side, we've seen the sales of smart security devices see a slight downturn, still very positive, but locks, doorbells, and cameras, we have seen a dip compared to previous expectations. One of the key reasons for that is we're spending more time at home, and so there's less of a need to purchase a security device to see what's going on in the home. Despite that, we do expect to see all product sales return to pre-COVID expectations by 2022. Next slide. Thanks, Alison. So what we have now is an industry growing really healthily and has not been impacted by the global pandemic as much as others. But still, a vast majority of consumers are not purchasing a smart home device. And so we really want to understand what are the barriers, how can we motivate the consumer to purchase these devices. One of the key areas of concern is these devices are too expensive, and the devices do remain pretty expensive in most countries. But we do expect this barrier to entry to become less of a concern in the coming years as the average cost of smart home devices decrease. So for example, the smart security devices we expect to reduce by 10% globally in 2020. We expect a 4% reduction every year on average in the coming 5 years. But possibly the most difficult barrier to entry for smart home vendors to overcome is developing a compelling use case for the smart home device. So 37% of consumers do not see a useful one of these smart home devices. And although it is clear that security devices do provide that compelling use case of keeping family members, friends safe, many other devices do not have that compelling use case attached to them yet. Third one, privacy and security. That is a perennial issue across consumer electronics, but especially in the smart home, given that consumers very much value their private space. This is even more pertinent in certain markets like Germany. And it's an issue that has really remained as present over the last couple of years. We haven't seen any improvements in this space. And then the final one, the knowledge of smart home devices. That's another barrier. But we are likely to see that improve as a greater number of consumers purchase a smart home device and then talk about it amongst their friends and family. So despite this, we do recommend the industry put in place a strategy to educate the consumer on the use cases of these devices, as it's not always very clear. Next slide, please. So now looking more at the long-term evolution of the smart home. So we're anticipating in the coming years a number of advancements in technology and how we personally interact with the home and these individual smart home devices. So the first technological advancement we are expecting relates to visual platforms and enhanced environments. And this is going to be driven by improvements in mixed reality and augmented reality. So for example, we expect us to be able to perceive different environments when we're in the home through visual platforms around us. The second technological advancement relates to improvements in voice functionality, with voice platforms becoming more conversational and less robotic in order to convey meaning. So we're currently at command and control. You speak to your Alexa, it speaks back at you. Not very interesting. But when voice becomes more conversational, not only will it have more meaning, but we expect more consumers to use it and want to buy products with it. So we expect these two developments to come together and lead to more of an ambient intelligence user experience. The smart home will become more immersive and invisible, and we will interact with it more naturally. Fundamentally, this means that the technology will work for us, and we will move away from technology-literate people to people-literate technology. So we're already seeing firms add ambient modes to some devices, Samsung's QLED TVs or the wall concept, but we are way off this becoming the norm across all smart home devices, predicting anywhere between 10 years plus. Final slide, please. So in summary, I've got quite a lot of expectations, some in the near term, some in the long term. The first one, which we really expect to kick off, well, has already kicked off, but we expect it to happen throughout this coming decade, is the move to smart home as a service, as a pertinent business model, especially in the smart security space. We're already seeing it across a number of different devices, but we expect it to become more widespread. The second one is that we very much are estimating that smart home devices are going to become cheaper, and that will be a key reason for growth across the globe. However, we do recommend that vendors prioritize educating the consumer and to continue developing compelling use cases for these devices. And finally, in the near term, smart home devices will return to pre-COVID expectations by 2022. So now looking more at the longer term, conversational technology will change the way we interact with smart home devices. And then visual platforms will change the way users perceive the smart home, with an ambient intelligence home experience becoming more prevalent. We also expect devices to evolve, so we move away from technology-literate people, like ourselves, but not everyone, to people-literate technology, so the technology really understanding the people around it. And then finally, a slight curveball, we do expect to see new use cases emerge within the space in adjacent industries, but then interspersing and seeping into the smart home. So we expect that to happen in assisted living. That's already happening, but we expect more gravitas around this, as well as the smart electrical vehicle space. As more consumers buy electrical vehicles, we anticipate that will put more pressure on the grid, and it will clearly be a huge growth area for the smart home. Thank you all for listening, and I'll hand it back to Bruno.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Milind. Very, very interesting. So, right, I mean, we're on to the discussion section of this webinar. So let's start off with a question for Milind, really. Julian's just finished his piece and has talked a little bit about how COVID has impacted the market, and especially, I think, the smart security and monitoring market seems to have a particular uptick. What are your findings regarding how the impact of COVID has affected the market for home devices and in particular smart appliances?
So we are seeing some of the trends that Julian spoke about. Definitely video doorbells are getting very, very popular. But if you broaden the space a little bit and look not just at security, but also then at consumer appliances, climate control is one area where we're seeing connectivity as almost a default feature emerging in most of the new air conditioners that are being sold. And the use case there is fairly standard, right? You want to be able to switch on and off the climate control when you're far away from home. You want to be able to move the temperature in a far more intelligent way than a simple thermostat. And so that's really where some of the climate control angle comes in. We're also seeing an increasing uptake, at least in India, in robotic vacuum cleaners and dishwashers. And robotic vacuum cleaners in particular, the connectivity angle once again becomes fairly important because as a user, you do want to know which room has been cleaned, which room has not been cleaned. And so just the ability to see on your mobile phone what the robotic vacuum cleaner has done has become important. And so that's in the sort of white goods space. We're also seeing a lot of connectivity coming into kitchen appliances. And Julian spoke about it a little bit. People have stopped eating out, but that doesn't mean that people have stopped having fun through eating. And there's all sorts of experimental cooking going on, pandemic baking, a whole bunch of things. And really, the challenge for kitchen appliances is how do you get smart so that you allow an amateur cook to turn out semi-professional results, right? And so we see a lot of fairly intelligent connected probes, telling you that your bread is done or the meat is right temperature and so on. So yeah, there's a broad range of devices where we see connectivity becoming more and more important, Bruno. And what that does is that it then creates the challenge of having all of these devices having to coexist in one single app, right, from where you can control it. And I think that's really where OCF has a role to play.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, yeah, clearly robotic vacuum cleaners put a little bit of distance between the homeowner and, potentially COVID infected spaces that may be coming in from outside, and yeah, kitchen appliances also very interesting. So do you have any additional points here, Julian, based on what Milind just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, moving away slightly from the technology and the interoperability, really interesting points, Milind. I think it's important to say that the home appliance industry is one of the most stable in the world. But when looking at the consumer electronics industry, it doesn't really change that much, and especially in the more mature markets. But as a result of COVID, we have been pretty surprised with some of the trends. So looking at more mature markets, developed nations, we've seen supply chains and manufacturing lines being pretty impacted. But we've also seen consumer trends slightly change. So especially in Europe and North America, we've seen a big uptick in refrigeration sales as consumers have looked to cooling storages to place food basically in these stringent lockdown times. For the US and Western Europe, we've seen refrigeration shipments grow year on year by 3% and 2.7% respectively, far higher than we were expecting pre-expectation. And then we've also seen, similarly to what I was saying and what Milind touched on, as the consumer is spending less money on holidays, restaurants, socializing, they've got more disposable income to spend on consumer electronics in the home. So we've seen a kind of split where some of the market is deciding to smash out on these premium smart appliances. And then on the flip side, you've got consumers that are looking to buy just the cheapest refrigerator, basically, to put food in, to store food in. And then we have the less mature markets where we've seen economic growth unfortunately stunt, which again has been a result of the global pandemic, has meant that the home appliance industry in those countries have not grown as much as we had previously expected. So lower GDP growth basically means less people going into the middle class, which again is a very unfortunate thing. So pre-pandemic, we had India to be the fastest growing home appliance market in the world. We've now downgraded that to still being pretty healthy, but 3.7% year-on-year growth, way less than we were previously expecting.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. And yeah, it's quite clear refrigeration is an area that everyone's very interested in, because we're buying food in a different way and perhaps buying more and storing more than we did previously, and not eating out as much. Yeah, very interesting. So we know that, of course, TATA Elxsi is working on a lot of smart appliances. Would you like to highlight a bit more of the work you're doing for your customers in this space, Milind?
Sure. So a couple of things, right? I think one of the and let me try and sort of use that, Bruno, to highlight what are some of the challenges that a framework like OCF can help resolve. So one of our recent projects that we did for a customer of ours in India was to help them design an app that would control multiple smart appliances inside the home. And that included, no surprise, it included a video doorbell, it included a smart plug, and it included an air conditioner. And having these multiple appliances in a single device, onboarding new users, onboarding new appliances, as well as connecting to multiple clouds, right? Because you could have potentially these appliances coming from different appliance makers. I think these are some of the challenges that OCF is perhaps very, very well placed to address. That was definitely one. The second issue that we did, a second project that we did, and again, I think there's a role there for OCF to play, was essentially trying to help one of our customers build a test environment to see how well their connectivity solutions scale, how many appliances, as an example, can an edge. And we did benchmarking across a bunch of protocols, and actually there we did find that activity was the protocol that scaled the smoothest and the best. So that was a second example, and then so a bunch of things like that. There's also some work that we've been doing in terms of bringing in artificial intelligence into some of these connected appliances. And in that context, we've looked at how do you do more intelligent temperature control, how do you find a way of measuring people's or occupancy of the room, and increasing or decreasing the amount of energy you pump into the climate control. So things like that, Bruno.
Okay, yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you, Milind. And of course, the being able to communicate between different cloud vendors ecosystem, we call this cloud to cloud within OCF, is one of the core pillars of OCF. And most recently, both the Haier Group and Samsung have certified their OCF clouds using the Universal cloud interface, an API specified by Open Connectivity Foundation. So very, very interesting. Okay. And I guess, Julian, would you like to add anything regarding that interoperability zone?
Yeah, I think given that this is an Open Connectivity Foundation webinar, it's just really important. I think whatever I say, I'm going to be preaching to the choir in saying that interoperability in the smart home, it's a key factor, a key variable that needs to be addressed. The success of the industry really depends on it. And fundamentally, given the fact we have so many smart home devices within the home interacting with each other, if you don't have interoperability, you're destined for failure. And this has clearly been a perennial issue in the space, and it's so great that there are so many organizations like Open Connectivity Foundation that are trying to deal with it head on.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us perfectly, I think, into the next discussion point, which is regarding security. Of course, security has become a key issue for the Internet of Things, almost irrespective of the market. But really, in this environment, this webinar, we're really discussing the smart home and smart appliances. So Milind, what's your take on security and its importance for this market?
Oh, absolutely critical, Bruno. It's very, very clear that customers value their privacy above everything else. And especially in situations where you are using a smart or a connected living solution. For securing your home, it's absolutely important that the network doesn't get hacked, right? So definitely, security is one of the top topics when consumers are considering buying connected appliances. And various factors that people are looking at, how do you maintain confidentiality of customer information, right? And again, going back to your cloud-to-cloud, heterogeneous cloud kind of circumstance, how do you know how much information stays in which cloud? Things like that. At the same time, I think a lot of people have concern about how easy is it to hack into a connected appliance, especially if an appliance has a camera. How do we make sure that, or if the appliance is listening, right? If the appliance has a microphone, and Julian mentioned that voice-based interaction is going to become more and more common. So more and more of these devices have a microphone built in, and that brings in an additional layer of security challenges. So I think overall the threat assessment, the risk assessment has become an important component of when you design individual components of the network, but then also when you put the network together, right? And Bruno, I'm sure you have some thoughts on what are the kind of challenges that come about. The only one last point I want to add, Bruno, before I ask you for your thoughts on the security side, is the one challenge that we've seen where people are extremely, the questions that we've seen from appliance vendors is in terms of over-the-air upgrades and what does that mean for security. And that, I think, is something that you definitely have to keep in mind when you're engineering your solution. How do over-the-air upgrades, how do they get certified in a trustworthy manner? And, how do any of these identity credentials get certified in a trustworthy manner? So some amount of hardware support for security is important, but, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Bruno.
Okay, well, certainly. As I mentioned earlier, within OCF, we have a dedicated security work group. And we have done an awful lot of work on making sure that the OCF standard and its open source implementation is really as secure as it can be. Now, I think if we take a step back, we've seen that the legislators have already started working on this, and California SB 327, which is ratified at the beginning of this year, starts to put the onus for security on the vendor. And so vendors are now having to think about security not just you know, as a device-based issue, but as really as a life cycle issue. So security must be thought about from the point at which the device is manufactured, the point at which it is sold, installed, used, and then disposed of. And that's a fundamental shift in the way that technology companies think about security. One, I think, important aspect is that many of the emerging security standards that have been published, both in Europe and North America, do address the life cycle issue related to security. And they do provide a framework as to how to tackle these issues. Now, you know, within the Open Connectivity Foundation, as I mentioned, our dedicated security work group has actually taken each one of these standards and taken each specific baseline category and analyzed that, even down to the subcategory level, and compared that to specific paragraphs of the Open Connectivity Foundation standard, and then, you know, provided a comprehensive set of notes. All this is available on the Open Connectivity Foundation website under the security tab. So security, then, under the technology tab, technology, then OCF security. And you'll see that it's 14 pages long. So yeah, this is something that the Open Connectivity Foundation take extremely seriously. The members within the Open Connectivity Foundation take security within their ecosystem extremely seriously. And what we are doing is, as far as is possible, future-proofing products that use the standard against these baseline standards that have already been published. And as laws start to get put into place within the different territories that we sell our products into, you know, these products should therefore be future-proofed against that. So that's a little bit of a long-winded description, but really, I think we cannot have done much more to try and address this issue.
And it's a critical component of building a scalable network, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And crucially, it also allows different vendors to operate within one ecosystem. You know, I mentioned the cloud, the OCF cloud ecosystem that's already been certified by Haier and Samsung. So this allows for an ecosystem of makers to interact with the wider OCF ecosystem. But at the same time have that confidence that you know, the standard really does provide best in class security and is future proofing the product.
Fantastic.
Okay, so I suppose moving on, you know, we're in a world now which is really seeing an unprecedented situation with this pandemic and, you know, potentially a global recession. You know, as you can see, we're all working from home, and as we move forward into these uncertain times, what sort of new or perhaps innovative products, business models, companies do you think may be likely to emerge in this space, the new normal, as it were? Julian.
Thanks, Bruno. Great question. Covered a bit about the business model in the presentation on smart home as a service model or SaaS, smart appliances as a service. This phrase just keeps on coming up. But I'm really going to focus on a potential for new companies, actually. And I'm assuming there are some budding entrepreneurs listening in today, and I don't want to dampen any hopes, but I think within the product segments that I've discussed, the 5 security and monitoring, hubs, power, climate, lighting, it's going to be really difficult actually to kind of break the current kind of group of companies that are starting to dominate the market. I do expect larger companies in the home, like the appliance manufacturers, the tech giants, will start further consolidating their position in the coming years. I think the key reason for that, the smart home industry, those products that I was talking about, they're full of vitamins. So vitamins being nice to have products, but it's really the painkillers that provide a fundamental or provide a fundamental solution to a pain point to the consumer. And those are the products that are going to really make a difference. And those are the products that a startup can really leverage. Just going back a bit, I think companies like the major appliances, Samsung, Bosch, they're going to further strengthen their position because they're able to quickly make their devices within the home connect to the IoT, so a quick win. And then the tech companies, I think they'll be able to entice consumers because they have so many of them to buy further vitamin products through big marketing budgets and affordable prices as well. Just taking a step back, I think with the big caveat for these startups, they need to basically find a painkiller. That's again my thought on it. And I think it's probably going to be difficult in the product segments that I was talking about, where it could be easier, possibly a low-hanging fruit, maybe in the assisted living space or the smart electrical vehicle space. Again, not dampening any hopes. We know that Ring was only a few years ago that Ring had their meteoric rise in the smart security space. So there are lots of inspiring spaces around. But it would be great to hear your opinions. And I don't know if I'm being too dampening spirits too much for any budding startups.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, it's quite clear that there are opportunities for both new products and also new business models. And as you mentioned, the SaaS service-oriented business models have gained a lot of traction. But of course, different markets operate in different ways. So I don't know, Milind, do you have any additional thoughts here?
So I think I largely agree with Julian, but I think one key source of innovation in the next 12 to 24 months is going to be something that Julian spoke about earlier, which is voice interaction, right, or multimodal interaction. I think all of us today are afraid to touch devices, and I might still be okay to touch a device in my own house, but imagine sooner or later we're going to start going back to office. And would you be comfortable, as an example, touching the coffee machine, right? So if there is, so I think there is a potential to look at existing devices and see how they evolve within the constraints of the pandemic and how it has really changed people's lives, isn't it? And I think voice for one, but maybe other things like gesture or so on and so forth. We've done some work in recognizing, at a low cost, very simple gestures, and that we believe could be something that would sort of definitely see mass deployment in the next 2 or 3 years.
Very interesting, and I suppose going with this is increased use of biometrics, so that it's possible to tell who is interacting with a particular device.
Absolutely. So face recognition, as an example, is one thing that could, I could recognize Julian, and a lot of people are not very comfortable with that as well. So there's a whole bunch of privacy and ethics questions that come up from there. going back, Bruno, to our security conversation. But so biometrics does give rise to a whole bunch of security issues. But yes, I think there is increasing usage of factors like voice recognition or face recognition, for that matter.
Yeah, and of course, once you start to attach identity to information, the security or the requirement to keep that data secure is only increased, and hence the need for secure implementations and secure frameworks, and the lifecycle issue I mentioned for products as well. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I think Julian had something to say, Julian, and I cut you in.
No, at all. No, I'm in agreement with all of you.
All right.
Exciting times for sure.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, very good. I mean, I think I'll just close on the fact that then the processing that's required in order to implement this, the additional processing for a voice, gesture, biometric-based recognition, this is really increasing the amount of computing that's needed really at the end device. So I think within my own organization as a semiconductor manufacturer, yeah, we do see the increased requirement for added computing power, if you like, at the end device, and that has its own challenges regarding power consumption and so on.
And that's an interesting topic, right, Bruno? Because how you architect the network becomes a very big challenge there. So you have to really decide how much of compute actually happens at the end node, how much happens in the edge router, and how much happens in the cloud. And those trade-offs are very, very interesting. You said you're from a semiconductor company. We've definitely seen a trend towards semiconductor companies coming up with sort of custom chips to move at least a part of the AI computing to the edge. So if not the node itself, at least to the edge. And then do a smart trade-off between bandwidth, between power, and between compute. So it's a how do I say this? It's a balancing issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic that is continually changing. And as the technology is racing to catch up, I'd say. So yeah, very, very, very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, then. I think with your permission, we will close the discussion section. Thank you very much, Julian and Milind, for your inputs and insights. Extremely interesting and extremely interesting for the Open Connectivity Foundation as we try and evolve our standard to support emerging markets that and technologies that Julian has highlighted, and companies such as Milind doing such exciting work. So I'll hand back to Alison now. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our speakers for joining us today. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available following this event, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending.